the creation of this altogether new law. This law came into existence on 1st July 2016, 2017, 2017. Before that, there were a multiplicity of laws, each dealing with different area of indirect taxation. There was central excise and duty, which was being levied on the activity of manufacture. There was something called as a service tax, which was a tax on services. There was a tax law called as a VAT, value added tax, that was being levied on the activity of sale. In addition to that, all local bodies like municipal corporation, municipalities, etc., even cantonment board, they were collecting local levies, which was being called as octroi. So in this whole supply chain management, the persons were required to comply with different laws, and it was a complicated compliance culture. It was complicated because all those departments, they were acting independent of each other, and there was no question of any integration of data. After 2017, all those laws have been subsumed in one common law, which is called as a GST. In true sense, we can say that GST justifies the basic theme of one nation, one tax. I have also explained some of the basic concepts under GST. One is a dealer and another is a recipient. The entire process is computerized and digital. It doesn't leave scope for any manual intervention. Let me give some specific advantage which have arisen as a result of the fully integrated indirect taxation system in place. Because of this computerization, now it won't be possible for anyone to evade the taxes. More and more persons are voluntarily coming into the registration of GST, because only a person who is registered under GST Act, he will get recognition in the commercial world everywhere. And a very simple question arises in everyone's mind. All those persons who are dealers, who want to take part in the GST regime, whether it will make my product costlier or whether it will make my profit margins reduced. So let me give a very specific answer to that. There are two types of various stages of taxation. The tax which is charged on the output which I am providing to the end customer has to be computed, and at the same time, the tax which I have already paid on the various inputs which I have availed, it will get set off and netted off against each other. So to be very frank, at each level, I would end up paying tax only on the value added component at that level. Basically, this law complies with the fundamental principle that no taxation system should result into cascading effect which leads to inflation. Every month, we read the GST collection figures, and you will appreciate that those numbers are increasing day by day. Basically, the government's collection of taxes has improved a lot. The tax evasion has become negligible, and the entire nation as such is linked to an altogether integrated system of taxation called as a GST. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Has anybody joined online so that we can address their queries? And in fact, we are quite open to welcome as many as questions so that we can have our feedback and replies online. Hello? Has anybody joined?
Sir, today we don't have any participants.
Okay.
So
In
we
that
can
case,
carry on.
okay. In that case, I've leave this for another faculty who will speak on the another subject. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good morning, everyone. This is a session regarding the funding for a startup company. So before we start with this financing part, let us understand a few concepts. The first one is the entire startup funding requirement and the genesis of a startup to run for a long period of time is related to the basic corporate finance concept of profit maximization and wealth maximization. In the sense, any startup would survive for a long period of time only if the startup earns a lot of money or profits. Now, coming back to the wealth maximization, over a period of time, if the startups are doing really well, their valuation will go up, and the valuation of the startup is treated as a wealth maximization. These two concepts are different. Purely considering the financial perspective, keeping in mind these two objectives of profit maximization and wealth maximization, there are basically three decisions which are related to startup or any corporate organization. The first decision is always investment decision. Second is financing decision. And third is operating decision, or sometimes it is also called as a dividend decision. When we are dealing with the funding options available to the startup, it is related to the second decision called as financing options. So when the startup decides to invest certain amount in their infrastructure, logistics part, or to their day-to-day operations, they require a lot of fundings. And that funding has a lot of importance in terms of the startup company. When we are talking about the funding decisions, there are various options available to the startup to raise money and use it for a proper purpose. Let us understand a few basic principles which a startup owner should know. Always remember, if you're raising the long-term money, use it for long-term purposes. If you're raising short-term money, then use it for short-term purposes. Never ever use the short-term funding for long-term purposes. For example, if you're raising the money in the form of bank overdraft or a cash credit, then don't use it for long-term creation of the asset, because it will create a problem at a later stage for those startups. So these are fundamental principles, I think, which a startup owner should know. Another certain principles which the startup should know is the cost of funding. For example, if you're raising the money from the market or if you are putting in your own money, always remember how much is the cost of raising the money. So there are two parts. One thing, what is the cost of raising the money, and what is a perpetual cost or cost of maintaining the funds in the business. This decision has to be taken very carefully, in the sense, if the cost of raising the money is too high, then in long term, the startup will have to bear that cost and it should not affect the profitability. If the perpetual cost is more, then it may eat up the profitability of a concern. So before raising any kind of funding, keep in mind how much is the cost of your funding. In normal case, there are different ways in which the funds are raised, but typically it is classified into two parts. One is the owner's funding, which is normally called as equity, and second is funding from the outside sources other than the owners, is called as a debt component. Most of the startups will have both the ways, like equity plus debt, as far as their business is concerned. There are different ways in which the cost of equity or cost of debt can be arrived at. We can also find out the cumulative cost or overall cost of the funds raised. Second perspective is always compare this cost of capital with the return on investment. So a startup owner should be able to calculate ROI. There are different ROI calculators available on different platforms. So you can use the ROI calculator. So when your ROI is more than the cost of capital or cost of your funding options, then your business will survive for a long period of time. So just try to understand that your ROI should be more. So calculation of ROI, calculation of cost of your funding is a must. For example, if you have raised the money from the debt market from a bank at set 11% rate of interest, and if your ROI is say 15%, then probably it is more useful to the business. When the cost of funding is more than the ROI, then in long term, the startups may face a few more problems. Second is timing of the funds. So in this case, it is better to raise the funds only when those are essentially required to be deployed or invested in your business. If you raise the money too early in the business, and if you don't deploy that funding for the purpose of your business in short span of time, then you start incurring the cost of the funding, but there is no ROI. So keep in mind, when do you require the funding, that proper planning has to happen. So raise the money only when it is required for the purpose of business. Apart from cost and timing, third part is risk. If you are taking more and more debt component, the risk in the business will increase. So when you are raising the money, keep in mind how much is the risk which is related to your business and which is related to your funding and which may affect your business. Fourth perspective is control. So as you are allowing more and more investment from outsider, your individual control on the business may be diluted in terms of equity investment. So control is the fourth perspective. So these are the basic principles I think the startup owner should know before raising the funding. In the market, there are various options in which the funding can be raised. So the first option is the owner's own investment in the form of bootstrapping or their own savings. You can raise the money from your relatives and friends and so on. There could be a sweat equity. You have worked hard for your startup. So against those IPR or some kind of hard work which you have done, the shares can be issued to you. You can also raise the money from in the form of venture capitalists, angel funding from the banks. Again, banks are offering different type of loans. Apart from that, most important for startups is that most of the banks are having different types of schemes. So when you really need funding from banks or financial institutions, just check how many types of SME loans are available and try to understand their product with your requirement, because that exact matching is most important for the purpose of startup. If it doesn't match properly, then I think there could be a mismatch in terms of cash flows arising to your startup and it may impact you long term. For example, there are certain schemes launched by the government of India, or there are some schemes at the state government level. So startups should be aware of all these schemes and try to take maximum benefit of those schemes so that it will help you to build up your long-term profitability and the wealth. There are a few examples like there is Atal Innovation Mission schemes, there are Pradhan Mantri schemes, MSME loans, and so on. So try to understand which are the schemes available and try to raise the money from those schemes so that you can get a lot of funding for your startup. As you grow further, as your startup moves from one stage to other stage, from the initial small startup to the growth stage, then there is a maturity stage, then there is a hyper growth to the SME, your funding requirements will keep on changing. Considering that growth in the business, you should be able to inject money from the appropriate funding requirement. For example, in the initial stage, probably you will invest the money out of your own pocket, your own savings, from your relatives, and so on. As the business grows, probably you will take the money from the small banks or the financial institutions. If it further grows, then you will go for funding from angel investors. There could be from investment companies, and this funding requirement will start growing. At a later stage, the startup owner can also think of he can raise the money from the process of IPO, that is the initial public offering. So your form of organization, your objectives of the startup, and the funding requirements which are available in the market must match. If you match this properly, I think the funds are available in the market, and with proper projections of your business, you can raise the money at a respective point of time. So for example, if you have planned your business for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, and 7 years, depending upon your growth and actual realization of that growth in your business model, you can raise the money at the respective point of time. Always remember, funding requires a lot of time. So you should plan the funding requirement well in time so that the funding can be raised at an appropriate point of time. In normal growth, as you are aware, when you start the business in a small perspective, it could be an individual business or a sole proprietary business, which you can convert it to a partnership firm or an LLP for that matter. Further, you can convert it to a private limited company. Private limited company business can be converted to a public limited company, and public limited company can be listed on a stock exchange. So you can raise the money through IPO and so on. So these processes, I think a startup owner should know, which is more important as far as the finance knowledge is concerned. Although startup is growing, you may deploy more employees who are expert in accounting and finance, but from the owner's perspective, certain financial principles he must know. Another thing is the volume of funding, the volume of your business should match. And most important is the owner should be able to project or write down their proper business plans or business models, which can be shared with the investors well in advance. So investors can go through it and can offer good amount of funding to your business. The details are already given in the other Swayam platforms of the same course of entrepreneurship. And I'm open to any questions. If you have any questions, just let me know. Thank you. Yeah, any questions? Okay. So thanks a lot. I think this session is over. Thank you.
Krishna, can you please stop recording?
Yes, ma'am. And if you want to speak on the questions, you can go ahead with.
हाँ मैम झालं का?